Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening. Shalom, welcome to it. It is a Wednesday evening, which means it is time for the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Coming to you, of course, from Cape Town. I'm not in my usual location, so you're going to have to bear with me. There may be a bit of, let's call it ambient noise, as I have some African grey parrots in the background, so they might start copying what I say, but and some dogs around me. So guys, bear with me for the next 25 minutes or so as we have a conversation around the state of the economy. And we're not going to have this conversation in, with the usual big slang and the jargon and the economic talk, so to speak. We're going to have this conversation in a manner in which you and I can understand what exactly is happening in the economy. As I said in the title of the show, you are getting poorer. That's right. You are getting poorer. And you don't need an economist to tell you this. You don't need a politician to explain this to you. You can feel it in your pockets. You can see it when you are going to the grocery store. You can see it when you drive in to a petrol station and that ticker keeps moving in an upward direction, but the number, or rather the amount of petrol doesn't match the scary price you ever increasingly see. You can see it when you drive around South Africa, whether you are in an urban center or in rural parts of the country. Fellow South Africans are beginning to fall by the wayside. We're seeing more and more South Africans take to the streets to eke out an existence, either by begging or, of course, picking up scrap metal, whatever the case may be. We're seeing fellow South Africans become poorer. Now, I paint this picture in the context of a South African elite, a political elite at that, and politicians who, for them, life is, as always, it just continues for them. They don't experience the poverty. They don't feel the rising petrol and diesel prices. They don't see a difference at the grocery store. They aren't the people who are having to take a minute or two longer in order to ponder as to which product is cheaper and should I sacrifice my usual food basket. They're not having these conversations. Oh no, life for them is still just as great as it always has been, because invariably they live their lives off of our money, our dwindling money, that is, but our money nonetheless. It seems like it has been you and me who have taken a shave when it comes to our incomes, when it comes to our pockets, when it comes to our savings. But for politicians, it's still the creme de la creme. They're enjoying the high life, often living off of us. And I think it's time we have that conversation right now, as three things come hurtling towards us as a perfect storm. The first, of course, is the unemployment rate in this country, which in some places like the Eastern Cape is north of 50%. That's 1 in 2 residents of the Eastern Cape, and really well over 40% of South Africans broadly being unemployed. That is the first thunder, if you will, of the perfect storm. The second ambit of it, if I can call it the dark clouds, if anything, is the inflation picture. The very money in your pocket right now, the very money in your bank account right now is worth less than it was a quarter ago or a year ago. That has implications for your ability to build any form of savings to try and stave off the worst effects of that third element, of course, which is poor economic growth, the poverty rates in this country, and the bad ideas by politicians that continue to exacerbate the situation. A continuation by the political elite who are immune, as I said, to the effects of their decisions, a continuation of them making those bad decisions, what economists call the moral hazard. The idea that you make decisions, but because you don't pay the price of them, you continue to make those bad decisions. But hey, don't take it from me. Don't take the jibber jabber from me. Let me bring on some voices, trusted voices here on the BDL show, who will help me unpack this issue in a short conversation tonight. Just give me a moment, people, as I try and fiddle with what is a very mobile system here. But economist from the Center for Risk Analysis. Here's a chap who's a firm favorite here on the BDL show, because he does take those big gobbledygook jargon words and place them in everyday language. I'm talking, of course, about Bheki Mahlobo as he hops on screen. There he is. Bheki, good evening.
Good evening, Sihle. Thank you so much for having me on, and good evening to your viewers. Looking forward to the
Excellent.
chat, even though it's not looking good from all aspects.
That's right. And we'll definitely unpack that in a moment.
Mm.
And someone who's been the canary in the coal mine, great, writing often in great detail as to how bad it's going to get is Chris Hattingh, analyst at the Institute of Race Relations. There he is. Chris, good evening.
Good evening, Sinclair and Bheki. A pleasure to be with you guys, and also gives me an opportunity to announce that from today I'm with the Center for Risk Analysis. So you've got the whole team here, Sinclair.
Yeah,
I was about to
Chris has
say,
now
hey man.
joined the dark side.
Well, there you have it. There you have it, guys. Let's hop straight into it because tonight's conversation really is not a long one, but it's one which I think we need to hit the nail on the head from the get go. Chris, I must begin with you because there's I described in my intro what is effectively becoming a bit of a perfect storm that I don't need to spend a long time explaining to the average South African because they see it in the basket of goods, for example, at the grocery store for them. They see it in the amount they're paying for prepaid electricity, for example, where you're paying for more, but you're getting less. Why is that?
Yeah, and I think we can all point to policy decisions that have been made the last 15 to 20 years, which are now bearing these concrete effects. So, for example, your money doesn't go as far as it used to because governments have tended to print more than they used to before. That in turn devalues the currency. When you have policies that decrease investment, something that Bheki can talk about in great detail, as we've seen in South Africa, fixed investment declining over the last 10 years. When that declines, you don't see as much economic activity, you don't see real job creation, you don't see lots of manufactured goods being put out, and that in turn means that people's money, which doesn't mean as much as it used to, also doesn't buy them those sorts of goods that they used to in previous years. So the whole economic sort of sphere steadily but slowly but surely declines in complexity and activity. All of that comes together to make people poorer, and people have to make harder decisions with where their money goes. Do they spend it on schooling, on food? Do they spend it on perhaps other ways of trying to move around, earn a living with fuel price increase? Can people still afford to take a taxi to work or not? I mean, those things are everyday harsh decisions, but it's all ultimately because governments, not just ours, but governments around the world have made the wrong policy choices, especially the last 2 years, and that is now coming to bear on lower and middle income consumers.
But Beg, even as Chris says that, there's the usual pushback, especially from the sort of broad left, center left in this country, who happens to be the majority in a political sense. That is in our formal politics. They'll say, "Oh, there go those classical liberals and libertarians again, blaming government." It's not government's fault, they'll say. Government, in fact, has been doing a fantastic job in providing social grants, for example. In fact, if you look at the latest quarter labor force survey that came out, they'll say, just look, government was creating the jobs and we saw an uptick therefore. So government should be creating more jobs. That'll fix the economy, won't it, Beggy?
No, Sihle. You started off the segment by accurately stating that most of these policymakers do not face the consequences of the bad policy decisions. And you could see this, like, for example, with our current unemployment numbers, for example, that came out yesterday, which you see a minor decline in our unemployment rates, now sitting at 34% under the official definition, 45% under the expanded definition, which includes discouraged work seekers. Now, what is often not talked about is where the country was before we entered lockdowns, before the pandemic in 2020. We're still about 1.5 million jobs short compared to 2019 levels. That's about 1.5 million South Africans that don't have jobs today, and about 12.5 million South Africans that are considered unemployed under the expanded definition. Now, those numbers come as a consequence of the policies, the very much hostile policies that Chris has mentioned, and the very much hostile policies that has been written by those very same politicians that are shielded from the consequences of the action, especially in a context where we're seeing a rapid rise in prices, Sihle. You also mentioned it quite rightly that when an average South African goes to a grocery shop, they can feel the pinch by the wallet. The wallet is getting thinner and thinner over time. Our official inflation rate sits at about 5.9%, but looking at the individual food items, such as that of oil and fats, such as that fish oil for cooking, has increased by 20% year on year. Transportation, 15% year on year. And now, if the fuel price goes beyond 25 Rand, that would be a 50% increase, more expensive for motorists to go to work, 50% increase for trucks to move goods around the country, which will mean it will be more expensive to now buy goods, as well as the transportation of goods, 50% more for taxis to transport individuals that are going to work. And this particularly impacts poor households in the country. Those very same poor households that have been impacted over the past 10 years of the hostile policies that the country has faced.
Guys, again, I don't want to dwell too much on this because I do want us to have that in the last sort of 10 minutes of conversation around what can the individual consumer do and what sort of ideas should we be lobbying for now that really the shit has hit the fan. Excuse my swearing, because it's gotten to a point where for me this registers on a very emotional level. We're talking about South Africans here who already, for a lot of them, they were on the cusp. For a lot of them, the ends were barely meeting. And for those South Africans, it's always the message from the hoofdy types, the political elites, the politicians of, you must tighten your belt. You must prioritize this or do that. You must prioritize, spending less, they'll tell us. The very same advice that they for themselves, which is always a test in a democracy. It's always a test in a democracy. What those who write the rules, what those who pass the laws, what those who exercise the power, when they write the rules, write the laws, pardon me, and exercise the power, do they themselves live by those creeds? When a finance minister steps on stage and says, well, South Africans need to tighten their belts, do we see the same impetus from them from a government perspective? Because it does seem as though, Chris, that everybody is cutting back on spending except the politicians, except government. Everybody we're hearing day in, day out, pardon me, articles, news pieces about company X, small business B, cutting employees, retrenching people, tough, labor negotiations, because the money simply isn't there. But we've never heard anything of that sort from government. If anything, Chris, the one area where, even opposition parties now are finally waking up to it, and they've called for it. Cut the fuel levy, they've told us, or slash the fuel levy. It's one thing, but it's so insignificant. We need much more of that.
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about more commissions and summits and creating jobs and creating radical economic transformation. We could say that policies have resulted in radical economic transformation because we've got a record high unemployment rate. So perhaps what the government has tried up until this point has indeed worked. I think you're absolutely right to point to how people who make these decisions are shielded from the consequences thereof. There was certain female prime minister of Great Britain who talked about, with socialism, you eventually run out of other people's money. But she maybe didn't account for modern monetary theory, where governments just try to print more money. And we see now what happened in Sri Lanka, for example. That might be a good case study for what might happen in South Africa if our Reserve Bank isn't as comparatively good as it has been up until this point. It's not a very high bar, but they have done relatively well compared to other central banks around the world. At least that's one sort of saving grace. Just in terms of looking a bit further afield, and I know that we'll get to the maybe advice and solutions idea a little bit later on, but we have to warn people as well. I just want to point to India, where they've restricted sugar exports now as a protectionary measure for their own economy, and this follows after they banned wheat sales just over a week ago. So all of that is going to impact other emerging market economies that import more food, so maybe other sub-Saharan African countries, and that'll have a ripple effect on South Africa. So just to those watching and those who might be listening to this over the next week or so, we haven't hit rock bottom yet. I think there's more pressure still coming.
If I may interject as well here, Sihle, as well. This is touching on the unemployment numbers that just came off. I think it should also be highly, highly specified, or as well as emphasized, what's happening given our unemployment rates. Now, you mentioned there, Sihle, my home province, the Eastern Cape, an unemployment rate of about 52%. That's utterly madness. And about 3 weeks away from June 16, you have a youth unemployment rate close to 80%, sitting at about 75%. But that's not just the bare of it, right? Look at Argentina, look at India, even though they're now banning wheat exports. Look at Brazil, look at Turkey. What you will see in those countries when you look at those unemployment levels is that during the pandemic, you see a rapid rise in the unemployment levels, and then you see a dip in all the unemployment rates, to the point where even some countries are better off compared to where they were in 2019. South Africa is moving up and up and up to the point where South Africa has the highest unemployment rate compared to 183 countries. I know this because I've also checked these numbers. It is absolutely madness. And this is really reflective of what we see from the cabinet, really effective of the policies, the rigid labor market policies, such as that, what the president has now said that BE is an integral part of the economy, whereas it has been detrimental to millions of South Africans currently, to the point where majority of the people unemployed, sitting at about 79% of 7.9% under the official definition who are unemployed, have been unemployed for a year and more. 79% of those individuals, in a context where food prices are dramatically increasing. These are the people that are feeling the brunt most of the bad policies that this country is now seeing.
And this is perhaps where it gets frightening, especially for me, because it gets frightening because one doesn't have to think too far back, gentlemen, to remember when all hell broke loose and social order completely collapsed in this country. And that was, of course, if you look at the genesis of what caused that, we were dribbled and distracted to say, oh, that had everything to do with Jacob Zuma and blah, 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 blah. But really, that was maybe the face, the mask, if you will. But really, what was behind it was, at that point, a lockdown. In other words, decisions by politicians that had gotten to a point where, for the average and really poor citizen in this country, it became completely unbearable, and it spilled over into a violent rioting and really looting that we saw. Where am I going with this? I'm going here. We are literally going to see that again. Mark this down. Big Daddy Liberty said this. It is the 2nd of June today, chaps. I'm calling it. We are literally going to see this again. And this happened a year ago, literally in July last year. I'm not saying it's going to happen in a few days or next month or whatever, but you cannot have a situation where, for example, as Bheki cited, 80% of young people in a particular province unemployed, near on 50% nationally. If you look at the expanded definition of unemployment, which for me is the real definition of it, because it includes those South Africans who have given up looking for work. You mean to tell me in a society like that somehow social order is going to be maintained? It just begs belief that anybody would even think that. Chris, I'm going to come back to you, because for me there's an imperative here. And I want to spend another 2 or 3 minutes or so just to unpack this. Ideas matter, Chris. We live in a country which effectively believes, if we were to just give it a one-liner, it believes that or those in power, believe that the state is the best way in which to organize society, expand or create opportunity in society, and to control all facets of life, economic, social, and political in society. It's those ideas, whatever you want to call it, statist, leftist, socialist, communist, but basically it is a collection of people who hold those ideas, who have ruled the roost, so to speak. But the chickens are literally coming home to roost. What do we need now, Chris, as we begin to shift away from that?
You're absolutely right. I would say that policies are downstream from ideology, and then consequences are downstream from those policies. And doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight. So just because we say sort of socialism, statism, doesn't mean it's going to be a palace coup overnight. These are the consequences of years of policy sort of built on top of each other. Unfortunately, not building a very nice structure. One could say for those in power, it has benefited them, but not for the South African on the street. I don't think we should always say maybe BE has failed. I think it has succeeded in its intentions, which is to entrench power amongst the politically connected. In terms
That's
of
right.
a path forward and possible, I guess, hedging oneself against some of these risks. I mean, trying to pay down and pay off one's credit bills. That's a big one. With rising interest rates, you're going to pay more on your credit facility. So whether it's house payments, car, I mean, just your credit card, buying things on credit at PEP or Jet, that sort of stuff. Try and pay that off. You know, I think at least for the next year, we're going to see more interest rate hikes. So for the next year, prepare for that sort of aspect of your life to maybe lessen your risk in that area. In other ways, if you can afford it, try and diversify, of course, some of your investments. If you're in that fortunate position, don't just buy maybe, for example, Bitcoin. We've seen that, but maybe now is the best time to get in there because it's low. But buy stuff like precious metals. South Africa is still riding a commodities boom. You might do better there if you benefit from that at this point in time. And then just I mean, this is for me a subjective, personal, maybe emotive call to action, but try and reach out to those around you. And I know it's difficult and we all have our stresses and stuff day to day, and your neighbor's dog is barking and you don't want to deal with that stuff, but maybe just on your community WhatsApp group, see who's really struggling with what, if you can help them with something. I know none of us gave Minister Gordon Guana the idea to increase the welfare grants, for example. We didn't cause that, but we can help mitigate some of the consequences and in turn, hopefully filter through and lessen the potential for things to really explode all around the country. I mean, people are told for years and years and years, yes, X and Y is coming, vote for us, we're going to give it to you. And then when we see violent actions happening, we're all surprised and we're like, oh, how can this happen? And how can you take to the streets? That's real desperation, and it's not to justify it, but it gets real for people when you can't feed your family and stuff. So if you can help each other in small ways, try and do that as much as you can.
Absolutely, Bheki. I want to give you the final word on this, but really, even as I throw the rugby ball, the figurative rugby ball to you, again, I want to stress this notion that ideas matter big. We now have to really begin to push each other, South Africans, to demand from each other, South Africans, number one, better ideas from the political elites, better ideas from us, the citizenry, and of course, better ideas insofar as ideas that prioritize three things big: freedom, property ownership and property rights, secure property ownership, property rights. And of course, the third one is a market economy, one where the individual, and really, as a classical liberal, I talk a lot about the individual, but really, we're a family society. So insofar as I say the individual, it's individuals within families, preferably, who are given the freedom to trade, to create, to innovate, to create wealth. From that wealth, build savings. From those savings, buy better options in life. These sort of baskets of ideas, what do they look like, Bheki, in practical ways? Top three interventions you'd want to see in the economy. Chris, I might throw the question to you too if we have time.
Top three. The first one is, and I believe is the most important one, and that is that of securing of property rights in the country. Investment in the country declined after the 2007 ANC Polokwane conference, where EWC became the main policy objective of the ANC, which fundamentally weakened property in the country, property rights in the country, leading to a decline in investment levels in the country. Now, as a country like South Africa, what South Africa needs is an increase in manufacturing, an increase in businesses, which is achieved by an increase in investment levels. And if you do not see that, then you do not see a growing economy. Here's one more stat for you here, Sihle. If South Africa was doing the same thing as what we see in other emerging markets, in other words, if we're not following the downward path that we're seeing right now over the past 10 years, we could have had about 23 million South Africans employed today compared to the 14.9 now currently. Now, that's a difference of close to about 10 million South Africans that would have been employed. Now, that's the opportunity cost that is not paid for by the policy makers. That's number one. A second thing is that we need to improve our education system in order to equip young South Africans, the very same South Africans that are faced with an unemployment rate of about 75% and are barred from employment, to be employed within the labor force, as well as that of scrapping rigid labor market policies, which allows companies to therefore hire people, like you mentioned there, CK, to allow people to trade their labor, to trade their services for income, in order to receive that income to sustain themselves and their families. These are the points that are not understood by the ruling government and unfortunately have been detrimental to many households and families in the country.
Absolutely. Chris, I'll throw that on to you just as a final cast. Top 3 interventions we should be seeing, because again, my argument simply is, if we have for the past 30 years and really much longer, because apartheid was the same thing, colonialism was the same thing, it was mostly ideas that saw the state and politicians being prioritized at being at the center. If I'm arguing we should be heading in the other direction, where the individual is given primacy, freedom, markets, and property rights, what top 3 ideas for you to create that sort of society?
I'm going to shift it away a bit from the sort of policy perspective and to the individual action perspective. So if you're capable and in a position to do so, try and support organizations such as the Institute of Race Relations, Sakeliga, AfriForum, others who do the policy lobbying and the policy work, but who also try and take concrete steps and actions with communities to try and future-proof them, to stay-proof them, to make sure that when maybe violence erupts in South Africa again, that communities are better prepared. Try and support those organizations financially if you can. Otherwise, just share their work. Talk to your friends and networks about them. Try and share our research with people and make sure that you at least get new ideas out there. I think a lot of South Africans are looking for something different, something new. And it's sort of that critical mass point where if we can get enough information out there in the battle of ideas, we can really start to shift things. People are looking for fresh ideas, but you need to give them the information. It's not going to happen automatically. But everyone, I think, is involved in that battle. It's not just those of us, for example, who speak on these shows. It's those of you who engage with our work and who share it with your networks as well. So that can be a more concrete way for people to actualize change in the country.
Absolutely. And maybe on that particular note, let me thank my 2 guests, of course, both from the Center for Risk Analysis, Bheki Mahlobo, economist in that part of the world. There he is. And of course, Chris Hattingh, analyst at the CRA. And thank you, by the way, for watching. Please, even as I say that, please hit that like button, folks, on your way out. And I want to repeat, perhaps, the question I posed at the very end. We have been a society, unfortunately, where politicians have ruled the roost, big government has ruled the roost, and it has done so to disastrous effect, as those governments invariably have always picked winners and losers in society using race. Colonialism did it, apartheid did it, today's African nationalists do it, and I'm saying enough is enough. Enough is enough with the leftist race-baiting and race-obsessed political elites for once in our society, or in the lifeblood, if you will, of our society. Let's prioritize ideas that place liberty at the forefront. Liberty ideas, a society, if you will, that is free, prosperous, non-racial, and property owning. That's the dream, and there are practical ideas in which you can do that. And perhaps on this show, we're going to be discussing those practical ideas much, much, much more. And beyond just discussing them, perhaps it's time I hit the road again and go community to community advocating for these ideas. But this time with one key difference, bringing that content onto this show so that you can see how fellow South Africans on the one hand are living, but also how they engage new ideas that build, as I said, a free, prosperous, property-owning, non-racial society. That is the sort of society I want to build, and you're going to be a part of that here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I hope we illuminated a few data points which maybe you didn't understand, or maybe you did and wanted to hear a bit of analysis on. With that being said, thank you for watching the show. As always, you'll see me again on Sunday for Liberty and Friends. That'll be this Sunday at 8 p.m. Remember, hit that like button on the way out. And remember, as I always say at the end of every show, never trust a commie.